What if I told you some of the most brilliant spy operations in history were so perfectly executed, their secrets remain locked away even today? Imagine a world where documents are still classified, identities remain hidden, and motives are so deeply buried that even the most advanced intelligence agencies hit dead ends. This isn't fiction, it's the reality of historical espionage, where some stories are so enigmatic, so baffling, they've resisted explanation for decades, sometimes even centuries. These aren't just cold cases. They're mysteries woven into the fabric of global politics, wartime strategy, and human ambition, leaving us with questions that continue to echo through time. You might wonder how something as intricate as an espionage operation could simply vanish without a trace, but that's exactly what makes these stories so compelling. Think about it, behind every unsolved case is a spy who mastered the art of deception, a message that was never decoded, or a betrayal so subtle it went unnoticed until it was far too late. These aren't mere footnotes in history books. They're living puzzles that challenge everything we think we know about loyalty, secrecy, and the lengths people will go to protect or steal the world's most valuable secrets. And what's even more fascinating is that many of these mysteries aren't relics of a distant past. They're still active topics of debate among historians, intelligence experts, and armchair detectives like us, who can't help but feel drawn into the intrigue. So today, we're embarking on a journey into the shadows, exploring 25 of the most perplexing unsolved cases of historical espionage. From vanished double agents to encrypted messages that have never been cracked, each story is a window into a world where nothing is quite as it seems. You'll discover how a single unanswered question can rewrite history, how a missing clue might still be out there waiting to be found, and why, after all this time, these mysteries still capture our imagination. This is more than a list, it's an invitation to step into the shoes of those who lived these secrets, to feel the tension, the uncertainty, and the thrill of the unknown. So lean in, and let's uncover the stories that have kept experts guessing for generations. Our journey begins with a case that didn't just shape an investigation, but altered the course of a world war. Picture this, it's January 1917, and the First World War is locked in a brutal stalemate. The United States, under President Woodrow Wilson, is still stubbornly neutral, a fact that deeply frustrates Germany. In a desperate gamble to keep American troops from ever reaching European shores, the German Foreign Secretary, Arthur Zimmermann, devises an audacious plan. He drafts a secret diplomatic message, a telegram, intended for the German ambassador in Mexico. Its proposal was nothing short of explosive. If Mexico joined the war on Germany's side, they would be rewarded with the return of their lost territories in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. It was an offer designed to ignite a war on America's doorstep, diverting its attention and resources. British intelligence, specifically the cryptanalysts in Room 40 of the Admiralty, intercepted and decrypted this earth-shattering message. Their challenge, however, was immense. They couldn't simply present it to the Americans. To do so would be to admit they had cracked Germany's most secure codes, an intelligence advantage they were desperate to protect. The official story, the one that prompted headlines across America and helped push a reluctant nation into the war, was that a British agent had simply stolen a copy of the encoded telegram in Mexico. This convenient tale allowed the message to be published without a whisper of British code breaking. But that's where the real, unsolved mystery takes root. How did Room 40 actually acquire the raw encrypted message in the first place? The prevailing theory points to a breathtakingly bold intelligence operation. German diplomatic messages to the Americas were transmitted using a complex relay system. They were sent from Berlin to Washington, D.C., on American diplomatic cables, a service Germany was permitted to use. From Washington, the message was then sent to Mexico via commercial telegraph lines, which is where the British supposedly snatched their copy. Many historians now suspect the British, through a combination of cunning and coercion, managed to gain covert access to the telegraph office in Mexico City, allowing them to copy the message without anyone knowing. Yet, whispers and alternative theories persist. Some suggest a mole within the German embassy in Washington may have provided a copy. Others postulate that British intelligence had already compromised the commercial telegraph cables themselves, listening in silently. The truth is, the exact method remains one of espionage's best-kept secrets. The operatives involved took their knowledge to the grave, and the official files, if they ever existed, are likely still buried deep within classified archives. The success of the Zimmerman telegram's revelation was a masterpiece of misdirection, a magic trick so perfect we're still debating how it was done over a century later, a testament to the silent, shadowy work that truly changes the world. While the Zimmerman telegram showed the power of cracking a single, pivotal message, our next case involves a machine that generated millions of impenetrable messages every day. For years, the story told was one of British genius at Bletchley Park, where a team led by Alan Turing famously broke the German Enigma cipher, an achievement credited with shortening the Second World War by several years. But what if that story, as monumental as it is, was only the final chapter? What if the first people to crack the unbreakable Enigma were not the British, but a small, brilliant team of Polish cryptanalysts working in secret years before the war even began? By the early 1930s, the German military was rapidly adopting the Enigma machine, a sophisticated electromechanical cipher device that looked like a complex typewriter. When an operator pressed a key, electrical current would flow through a set of rotating rotors and a plugboard, scrambling the letter into a completely different one. The settings changed every single day, creating a number of possible cipher combinations so astronomically high that the Germans firmly believed it was mathematically impossible to break. They were confident that even if an enemy got their hands on an actual machine, without the daily settings, it would be nothing more than a complex paperweight. Meanwhile, in Poland, the situation was dire. Sandwiched between a resurgent Germany and the Soviet Union, Polish military intelligence knew their country would be the first battleground in any future conflict. Understanding German military communications wasn't just an intellectual exercise, it was a matter of national survival. So they assembled a team of young mathematicians from Poznan University, including brilliant minds like Marian Rejewski, Henryk Zygalski, and Jerzy Rozicki. Their task was as simple as it was impossible: break the unbreakable code, and they did it. In 1932, Rejewski achieved the unimaginable. Using a combination of sheer mathematical genius, a tiny bit of espionage from the French, and some fundamental flaws in German operating procedures, he deduced the internal wiring of the military Enigma rotors. This was the master key. With that knowledge, the Polish Cipher Bureau didn't just read messages. They built their own working replicas of the Enigma machine. They then engineered two brilliant devices to keep up with the daily setting changes: the cyclometer, which cataloged characteristics of the machine, and the bomba cryptologicsna, an electromechanical contraption that could rapidly search for the day's key settings. By 1938, they were reading German Enigma traffic consistently. But as German procedures became more complex, the Polish resources were stretched to the breaking point. Knowing war was inevitable and their country doomed, they made a breathtaking decision. In July 1939, just weeks before the German invasion, they invited their British and French counterparts to a meeting near Warsaw. They revealed everything: their reconstructed Enigma machines, their cryptological bombs, their methods, their breakthroughs. It was an act of incredible generosity and strategic foresight, handing over the keys to the kingdom. This gift provided the foundation upon which Bletchley Park would build, saving the British years of work they simply did not have. The unsolved mystery, however, lies in the shadows of this handover. Did the Poles reveal every single one of their techniques and discoveries? Some historians argue that in the chaos of their impending invasion, the Polish team gave the Allies everything they had. Others speculate that certain shortcuts, mathematical insights, or even early decrypted messages might have been lost, destroyed, or kept secret. Were there elements of the cipher that the Poles understood intuitively but never fully documented? Secrets that died with them during the brutal war that followed. The complete extent of their knowledge, and whether every last scrap of it made it to Bletchley Park, remains a topic of quiet debate. a hidden layer to one of history's greatest intelligence coups that we may never fully uncover. The Cambridge Five represent perhaps the most devastating and successful penetration of British intelligence by a foreign power, a spy ring so deeply embedded that its true size remains one of the Cold War's most persistent puzzles. We know the core five: Kim Philby, Donald Maclean, Guy Burgess, Anthony Blunt, and John Cairncross. Their betrayals are the stuff of legend, passing a breathtaking volume of secrets to the Soviet Union that arguably altered the early dynamics of the entire Cold War. But the haunting question that has never been put to rest is a simple one: were there only five? For decades, historians and intelligence veterans have argued that the group was likely larger, that the Five was merely a convenient label for a network that may have included other, still unknown members who lived out their lives never suspected, their secrets buried with them. This mystery stems from the nature of their recruitment. They were not professional spies lured by money. They were idealists, converted at Cambridge University in the 1930s when the rise of fascism made Soviet communism appear to many intellectuals as the only viable bulwark. A charismatic Soviet recruiter would identify promising, disillusioned young men from privileged backgrounds, the very type destined for high office. This systematic approach suggests it is highly improbable that their efforts yielded only these five perfect assets. MI5 files are filled with unresolved suspicions about other high-flying civil servants, diplomats, and intelligence officers whose behavior patterns or accessed information hinted at possible allegiance to Moscow. But concrete proof remained forever elusive. The other great unresolved question revolves around the consequences, or stunning lack thereof, that they faced. Burgess and Maclean defected to the Soviet Union in 1951, escaping just in time. Philby, after years of suspicion, eventually followed in 1963. Cairncross confessed and was dismissed, but never faced prison. Anthony Blunt, the surveyor of the King's Pictures, was granted official immunity in exchange for a confession in 1964, a deal kept secret from the public for another 15 years. The British establishment, reeling from the humiliation, seemed desperate to contain the scandal rather than pursue every last lead. This has fueled intense speculation. Were there more powerful figures whose exposure was deemed too damaging to the state? Did the government, in a choice between justice and national embarrassment, consciously choose to let some sleeping dogs lie? The full, unvarnished truth of the Cambridge spy ring's size and the quiet deals made to contain its fallout likely died with the senior MI5 officers and cabinet ministers who managed the crisis, leaving us with a legacy of suspicion that the highest corridors of power were even more compromised than we were ever told. While the Cambridge Five operated from within the comfortable halls of British power, our next case takes us into the very heart of Nazi darkness, where a different kind of spy ring took unimaginable risks. The story of the Red Orchestra is one of breathtaking courage and devastating betrayal, a complex Soviet intelligence network that hummed with activity right under the noses of the Gestapo. But its history is shrouded in a fog of wartime confusion and post-war propaganda, leaving us with a haunting question. Did the Nazis truly crush this network entirely, or did some of its key agents vanish into the shadows, their true stories and sacrifices forever lost to history? The name itself, Rotkapelle, or Red Orchestra, was coined by the Nazis, who pictured the network as a sinister conductor coordinating a symphony of espionage across occupied Europe. In reality, it was less a single orchestra and more a collection of resistance groups, with the most crucial one based in Berlin itself. Led by Luftwaffe officer Harro Schulz-Boysen and economist Arvid Harnack, this group wasn't comprised of professional spies. They were intellectuals, artists, military officers, and ordinary civilians horrified by the Nazi regime. They passed vital intelligence to Moscow, including detailed plans for the German invasion of the Soviet Union, reports on Nazi war crimes, and technical secrets about new weapons like the V-2 rocket. Their work was incredibly dangerous, transmitted via clandestine radio operators who knew that every second they spent on the airwaves brought the Gestapo's radio detection vans closer. In the summer of 1942, the Nazis began to close in. Using captured Soviet codes and sophisticated direction-finding technology, the Gestapo started unraveling the network. What followed was a wave of arrests so brutal it almost defies comprehension. Hundreds were implicated. Scholes Boysen, Harnack, and many others were executed, often hanged with piano wire from meat hooks in Plötzensee prison, a method specifically chosen by Hitler to maximize their suffering. The official Nazi narrative, and indeed the early historical record, presented the Red Orchestra's destruction as a complete and total victory for the Gestapo. Yet, this is where the mystery deepens. In the aftermath of the war, Soviet intelligence archives remained sealed, and the East German government, for its own political reasons, celebrated the orchestra's leaders as communist martyrs, a story that was often oversimplified. This created a perfect environment for unanswered questions to flourish, where some of the lower-level agents or couriers simply missed in the chaotic dragnet. More intriguingly, there is persistent speculation that one or more of the group's central radio operators, the so-called pianists who held the entire communication chain in their hands, might have evaded capture. These operators were the lifeline, and their identities were the most closely guarded secret. If one managed to go to ground, destroy their equipment, and assume a new identity amidst the turmoil of collapsing Germany, they could have taken their story to the grave. The debate is fueled by inconsistencies in Gestapo records and anecdotal accounts that don't quite add up. Some historians point to radio transmissions that continued in patterns similar to the orchestra's even after the group was supposedly shattered, suggesting a surviving cell or a lone operator carrying on a hopeless fight. Others believe that the network's very decentralization, which initially made it so resilient, also meant that the Gestapo never fully grasped its entire scope. They may have cut down the main tree, but missed a few roots that simply stopped growing, their members choosing permanent silence over a risk of exposure. The truth is, we may never know the full roster of those who dared to resist from within the belly of the beast, and the complete story of the Red Orchestra remains one of World War II's most poignant and unresolved espionage tragedies. While the Red Orchestra's radios fell silent under the Gestapo's boot, a different kind of signal intelligence operation was just beginning, one that would uncover a spy network so vast its full scope remains hidden even now. Imagine the sheer volume of secret communication flowing out of the Soviet Union's embassy and consulates during the Second World War and the early Cold War. Diplomatic cables, intelligence reports, everything encrypted and sent seemingly secure into the ether. Now, imagine the Americans and British secretly recording all of it. They had the raw material, mountains of it, but the messages were scrambled by a cipher system the Soviets believed was unbreakable. This was the genesis of the Venona project, a decades-long, top-secret effort that would ultimately expose stunning betrayals, yet would also generate one of history's most frustrating espionage mysteries, a gallery of ghosts, spies we know operated at the highest levels, but whose real names we will likely never know. The project began in earnest in 1943, led by the U.S. Army's Signal Intelligence Service, the forerunner to the National Security Agency. The Codebreakers faced a monumental task. The Soviets used a one-time pad system, which is meant to be mathematically perfect. Each pad contains a list of random keys, used only once to encrypt a message, and then never used again. If implemented correctly, it is utterly unbreakable, but the Soviets made a critical, and from an intelligence perspective, a glorious mistake. Due to the tremendous pressures of wartime production, they inadvertently duplicated some of these one-time pads. This tiny flaw created a minuscule fracture in their cryptographic armor, and the American and British cryptanalysts, with a blend of brute force and breathtaking ingenuity, slowly began to pry it open. For years, they toiled in absolute secrecy. The first major break didn't come until 1946, and the deciphering process was agonizingly slow, like assembling a billion-piece jigsaw puzzle with most of the pieces missing. But the fragments they did recover were earth-shattering. Venona decrypts provided irrefutable evidence of massive Soviet espionage within the United States and Great Britain. They confirmed the treachery of spies like Alger Hiss and revealed the atomic bomb theft by Klaus Fuchs and the Rosenberg ring. It was Venona that provided the hard evidence for the suspicions that had been swirling for years. But for every identity confirmed, Venona produced a dozen more questions. The decrypts were filled with cover names, and while intelligence agencies successfully matched some to real people, like Antenna, and Liberal being Julius Rosenberg, dozens of others remained, and still remain, tantalizingly out of reach. These unresolved cover names point to a terrifying reality. Numerous highly placed Soviet agents were never caught. We know they existed because we have their reports. We have their handlers' praise for the quality of their intelligence. We have their code names, like Blake, who passed information from within the State Department, or Godsend, an agent within the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, who provided incredibly sensitive political intelligence, but their true identities are a complete mystery. The reasons for these dead ends are as frustrating as the mystery itself. Many of the Venona decrypts are only partial, riddled with gaps where the Codebreakers couldn't recover the text. A first name might be there, but the last name is lost. A fragment of a workplace description exists, but not enough to pinpoint the individual. Furthermore, the intelligence agencies, once they had a confirmed name, often stopped looking. Their priority was neutralizing active threats, not solving every historical puzzle. And then there is the simple, chilling possibility that some of these unknown spies, these ghosts in the machine, saw the changing political winds of the Cold War, quietly retired from their treason, and lived out their lives as seemingly loyal citizens, their secrets dying with them. The Venona Project is a unique paradox. It is both one of the greatest counterintelligence successes of all time and a permanent, haunting monument to the secrets that forever remain just beyond our grasp. While the Venona decrypts exposed a web of spies from a bygone era, a different kind of intelligence coup unfolded in the 1980s, one that didn't involve stealing secrets from the enemy, but rather accepting them as a gift from a friend. The tale of the Farewell Dossier is a stunning Cold War anomaly, a moment where the roles of spy and ally became wonderfully blurred. It began not with a clandestine meeting in a dark alley, but with a conversation in the light of Paris. In 1981, President François Mitterrand of France took aside the newly elected American president, Ronald Reagan, and presented him with an astonishing offer. Mitterrand revealed that French intelligence had acquired an incredibly detailed and comprehensive collection of Soviet technical documents, and he wanted to hand the entire treasure trove over to the United States. This wasn't just a random assortment of papers. This was the Soviet Union's own shopping list for its massive, state-sponsored campaign to steal Western technology. For years, the KGB had been running a vast, coordinated operation known as Line X, where its officers, operating under diplomatic cover in embassies across the West, were tasked with acquiring advanced technology by any means necessary: espionage, smuggling, clandestine purchases through front companies, you name it. The documents given to the CIA laid it all bare. It contained the specific technologies the Soviets were targeting, the Western companies they were trying to infiltrate, the secret budgets allocated for these purchases, and perhaps most critically, the names of the Soviet research institutes and design bureaus that were the ultimate recipients of this stolen know-how. It was a complete blueprint of the entire Soviet technological theft apparatus. The man who delivered this gold mine to the French was a KGB colonel stationed in Paris, Vladimir Vetrov. Codenamed Farewell by French intelligence, Vetrov was not an ideologue disgusted with communism in the traditional sense. His motives appear to have been a complex mix of personal resentment over a stalled career, a fondness for the Western way of life he witnessed in Paris, and perhaps a simple desire to make a historic impact. He wasn't photographing documents with a miniature camera. He was simply taking home briefcases full of the most sensitive KGB files, handing them over to his French handlers, and returning them the next morning before anyone noticed. For over a year, he passed thousands of pages, providing an X-ray of Soviet technological espionage that was so complete it was almost unbelievable. With this dossier in hand, the CIA, under the guidance of Director William Casey, didn't just use it to protect American technology. They launched one of the most brilliantly devious counterintelligence operations of the entire Cold War, dubbed the Farewell Program. Instead of simply shutting down the KGB's avenues for theft, they decided to help them steal. Working with the FBI and Pentagon experts, they identified flawed or sabotaged technology that the Soviets were desperate for, faulty blueprints for stealth aircraft, defective microchips, flawed industrial software, and tainted pipeline components. They then used the farewell dossier as a guidebook, feeding this, poison candy, directly into the KGB's acquisition network through double agents and compromised channels. The result was catastrophic for the Soviet Union. There are accounts of pipeline valves that were engineered to fail under high pressure, leading to a monumental explosion in the Siberian gas pipeline in 1982 that was visible from space. The economic and strategic setback was immense, all because they were stealing precisely what the Americans wanted them to have. Yet, for all its success, the farewell dossier holds onto one final, tantalizing secret. While we know Vladimir Vetrov was the courier, the man who physically handed over the documents, a persistent question has always lingered. Was he truly acting alone? The sheer scale and breathtaking sensitivity of the material he provided has led some analysts and former intelligence officers to quietly speculate that he must have had a high-level accomplice back in Moscow. The theory suggests that someone with extensive access within the KGB's Directorate T, which handled technology transfer, might have been guiding Vetrov, helping him select the most damaging documents and shielding his activities. Vetrov's own role was cut short tragically when he was arrested in 1982 for an unrelated, violent crime. He murdered a romantic rival, and he was executed in 1984. Did he take the name of a powerful patron to his grave? Or was this disillusioned colonel truly a lone wolf, whose personal grievances accidentally changed the course of the Cold War? The official files remain closed, protecting what may be the last great secret of Operation Farewell. Now, let's shift from grand technological deceptions to a mystery that is deeply, hauntingly personal. In the tense spring of 1948, as Czechoslovakia was falling under communist control in a swift and brutal coup, a man was found wandering the streets of Prague in a state of utter confusion. He was well-dressed, but carried no identification. He spoke perfect Czech, yet he had no memory of who he was, where he came from, or how he had gotten there. This was the beginning of the baffling case known as the Amnesia Man of Prague, a story that reads like a Cold War noir film, where the central character's identity is the ultimate MacGuffin, and one that was never recovered. The man was taken to a psychiatric hospital, where doctors confirmed his amnesia appeared to be genuine and profound. He was polite, educated, and clearly not a vagrant. But in the paranoid atmosphere of a brand new Soviet satellite state, a man with no past was immediately viewed as a threat. Czechoslovak state security, already modeling itself on the KGB, suspected he was a spy. But for which side? Was he a Western agent who had been discovered, and somehow had his cover blown so completely that his mind shut down to protect his secrets? Or was he a Soviet or Eastern Bloc operative who had suffered a catastrophic psychological break during a mission? The authorities had no idea, and the man himself could offer no clues. Intelligence agencies on both sides of the Iron Curtain would have been intensely interested in such a case. If he was one of their own, they would need to either extract him or silence him. If he was an enemy agent, he represented a potential intelligence goldmine, a deep cover operative who could be coaxed back to sanity and persuaded to talk. The fact that he was never publicly identified or claimed by any government is what fuels the enduring mystery. Usually, in cases of compromised agents, there is a quiet diplomatic exchange or a body that turns up in a river. Here, there was only silence. The most compelling theory suggests he was a sleeper agent, someone implanted into a society to live a normal life until activated for a specific, critical mission. The immense stress of being activated after years of deep cover, combined with the sudden violence of the communist takeover, could have triggered a severe dissociative disorder, effectively causing his cover identity to completely consume his real one. He forgot he was ever a spy at all. Another theory posits he was the victim of an early, crude attempt at mind control or chemical interrogation that went horribly wrong, leaving him a blank slate. The mystery only deepens when we consider his eventual fate. After extensive and futile attempts to restore his memory, he was eventually transferred to a long-term care facility, where he lived out the rest of his days under a state-assigned name. He never remembered who he was. He died as he had lived for decades, a man without a history, a secret without a source. His file in the Czechoslovak secret police archives is likely extensive, but it remains classified, locking away the final answer. Was he a tragic hero, a pawn, or merely an unfortunate civilian caught in the gears of history? The Amnesia Man of Prague remains one of Espionage's most poignant and unresolved human puzzles, a ghost whose true mission vanished into the fog of his own mind. While the Amnesia Man of Prague was a victim of his own lost memory, our next case presents an almost perfect mirror image. A man who arrived with a story he refused to forget, yet one that no government would ever confirm. This is the strange tale of the man who walked into the American consulate in Zurich, Switzerland, in 1954, not as a defector, but as a lost asset desperately trying to come in from the cold. He insisted he was a spy, but one who had been utterly abandoned by his handlers, left to twist in the wind with a false identity and a life in ruins. His name was Oswald Lewinter, and his claim would launch a decades-long puzzle that has never been satisfactorily solved. Was he a genuine deep-cover operative cast aside by a careless intelligence agency, a brilliant con man, or something else entirely? Lewinter's story was intricate and compelling. He stated that during the final chaotic months of the Second World War, he had been recruited by the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which was the wartime predecessor to the CIA. His mission, he said, was to infiltrate high-level Soviet circles as a double agent. To make his cover identity bulletproof, his OSS handlers had supposedly engineered a complex backstory for him, complete with forged Nazi documents that painted him as a committed fascist. This legend was so deep and so convincing, he claimed, that it had even convinced the Soviets, who then recruited him for real. He was, in effect, a triple agent, playing a desperately dangerous game at the very dawn of the Cold War. The central, heartbreaking thrust of his narrative was betrayal. He claimed that when the OSS was disbanded in 1945 and replaced by the CIA, his existence was lost in the bureaucratic shuffle. His files were misplaced or destroyed, his handlers moved on to new posts, and he was simply forgotten. He was left stranded behind enemy lines, living under his fabricated Nazi identity, a persona that was now a toxic liability in post-war Europe. Every door he knocked on was slammed shut. If he tried to explain his true story to Allied authorities, his convincing Nazi paperwork made him look like a war criminal trying to invent a fantastic alibi. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own legend, a spy who no longer had a country to return to. The American officials in Zurich were deeply skeptical. His story was simply too fantastical, too much like a spy novel. They suspected he was either a mentally unstable individual suffering from delusions of grandeur, or a clever fraudster attempting to parlay a tall tale into a visa, money, or a new life in the United States. They turned him away, but Lewinter was nothing if not persistent. For years, he continued to press his case with journalists, historians, and even politicians, always sticking to the same detailed story. He possessed an astonishing depth of knowledge about intelligence tradecraft, wartime OSS operations, and specific personalities within the agency, details that a random civilian would be hard-pressed to know. This knowledge gave his claims a sliver of credibility that kept the mystery alive, and this is where the case becomes truly murky. In the 1970s, a curious thing happened. Some of Lewinter's claims were unexpectedly corroborated. A former high-ranking CIA official, peer-reviewed, who had served in the OSS during the war, came forward and confirmed that he remembered Lewinter and that his story was essentially true. This was a bombshell. It suggested that a terrible mistake had indeed been made, and a loyal agent had been left to fend for himself. Yet, the CIA itself never officially confirmed this. The agency's standard response was that they had no record of him, a statement that could be interpreted as either the truth or a convenient cover up for a monumental and embarrassing intelligence failure. So we are left with three equally troubling possibilities. The first is that Oswald Lewinter was exactly who he said he was, a forgotten hero, a victim of catastrophic bureaucratic negligence whose life was destroyed by the very country he swore to serve. The second is that he was a magnificent fraud. a pathological liar with an eerie talent for researching intelligence history, who managed to fool even a few former spy masters and weave a legend that endured for decades. The third, and perhaps most intriguing, theory is that he was a pawn in a much larger game. Could his initial recruitment and subsequent abandonment have been a deliberate, dark op? Was he used as a disposable asset in a mission so sensitive that his existence was always meant to be erased, making his heartfelt pleas for recognition nothing more than the unintended fallout of a ruthlessly amoral plan? Without his file, which the CIA either doesn't have or won't release, Oswald Lewinter remains permanently suspended in that gray space between truth and fiction, a living ghost story from the early days of the clandestine world. Shifting from the tragedy of a single abandoned operative to the terrifying prospect of global catastrophe, we arrive at a case where the stakes were almost unimaginably high. It involves the most devastating weapons ever created and a security protocol that, for a brief, heart-stopping moment, appeared to have failed completely. During the height of the Cold War, a portable device known as a nuclear briefcase, the very instrument that could authorize the launch of planet-ending missiles, temporarily vanished from Soviet control. The official story is that it was simply misplaced and quickly found. But the whispers and classified rumors tell a far more disturbing tale, one that suggests the world may have unknowingly teetered on the brink because of a simple, staggering lapse in security. To understand the gravity of this event, you first have to understand what the nuclear briefcase represents. The Soviet system was officially called the Chegit, named after a mountain in the Caucasus, though it's more commonly known by its Russian nickname, Yadernyi Chemodanchik. It wasn't a single suitcase, but a set of three, each one carried by a top leader, the General Secretary of the Communist Party, the Minister of Defense, and the Chief of the General Staff. These were not actual launch buttons, but sophisticated communication devices. In the event of a nuclear attack, they would authenticate the leader's orders and transmit launch codes to the rocket forces deep in their silos and submarines. The entire doctrine of mutually assured destruction rested on the absolute, flawless security of these devices and the officials who carried them. They were the ultimate symbol of control, and the idea that one could simply go missing is the stuff of nightmares. The incident is believed to have occurred in the late 1980s, as the Soviet Union was beginning to fray at the seams under the weight of its own bureaucracy and economic stagnation. According to the most widely circulated account, the briefcase assigned to then Defense Minister Dmitry Yazov was somehow left behind, unattended, in his official limousine after he had been dropped off. The driver, reportedly unaware of the catastrophic contents of the unassuming attaché case, drove off, taking the keys to nuclear apocalypse with him. For a period of time that remains hotly disputed, some say minutes, others claim horrifyingly longer, the Soviet Union's ability to command its nuclear arsenal was potentially compromised. The device was eventually located, still in the car, and returned without any apparent harm done. The official line was that it was a minor procedural error, quickly corrected, and that at no point was the device ever operable or accessible to an unauthorized person. But the intelligence communities in the West, and many analysts since, have expressed deep skepticism about this tidy explanation. The first major point of contention is the timeline. In a society as paranoid and tightly controlled as the Soviet Union, especially concerning its nuclear command, how could something so critically important be misplaced for any length of time without triggering an immediate and massive security alert? The protocols surrounding these briefcases were supposed to be absolute. Their handlers were elite KGB officers trained for this single, sacred duty. The notion that a driver could simply forget it and drive away stretches credulity. This has led to alternative theories that are far more sinister. One suggests the briefcase wasn't misplaced at all, but was the subject of a clandestine power struggle within the crumbling Soviet hierarchy. Could a hardline faction within the military, or KGB, dissatisfied with the reforms of Gorbachev, have temporarily seized the device in a botched attempt to gain leverage or even control over the nuclear arsenal? Another theory posits a terrifying near miss with a foreign intelligence service. If the briefcase was truly unattended for even a short window, was it potentially accessed by a Western agent? The technological intelligence gleaned from even a few moments of access to the Chegut's inner workings would have been incalculably valuable, providing insights into Soviet command and control that could have altered the strategic balance. The truth remains locked away in Russian archives that are likely never to be opened. The participants, including Defense Minister Yazov, who later was arrested for his role in the failed 1991 coup against Gorbachev, have given vague or contradictory accounts. The official silence itself is deafening. We are left with a chilling historical footnote that is either a testament to robust security that quickly contained a minor error, or a glimpse into a moment of sheer, unbelievable vulnerability. It forces us to confront a haunting reality of the Cold War, that the intricate systems designed to prevent accidental Armageddon may have themselves been fragile, held together not by infallible machines, but by fallible human beings capable of the most basic, and potentially world-ending, mistakes. But just as the world gradually stepped back from the nuclear precipice, a different kind of explosion was about to rock the intelligence community, one that delivered a treasure trove of secrets wrapped in an enigma. In the icy winter of 1961, a letter arrived at the American Embassy in Bern, Switzerland. It was not from a typical defector seeking asylum. It was a detailed offer from a high-ranking Polish intelligence officer, promising to unveil the deepest secrets of the Soviet bloc. This was the dramatic entrance of Mikhail Golniewski, a man whose incredible intelligence haul would be almost completely overshadowed by the breathtakingly bizarre personal claims he would make later, leaving his true motivations forever shrouded in doubt. Golniewski was the ultimate catch for the West. Codenamed Sniper by the CIA, he was a lieutenant colonel in the Polish security service, and more importantly, he was the deputy head of military counterintelligence. His position gave him a panoramic view of Soviet espionage operations across Eastern Europe. For over a year, he acted as an anonymous pen pal, sending a series of meticulously detailed letters to the CIA in West Germany, each one packed with the cover names of Soviet agents operating in the West. His information was so precise and so devastatingly accurate that it triggered a firestorm within Western intelligence agencies. He single-handedly exposed a stunning number of moles, including the infamous Portland spy ring in the United Kingdom and the high-level traitor George Blake within MI6. His revelations were a counterintelligence coup of the highest order, allowing the West to surgically remove cancerous betrayals they hadn't even known existed. In January 1961, fearing his cover was about to be blown, Golniewski made his move. He and his mistress fled to West Berlin under a prearranged plan, defecting into the waiting arms of the CIA. His debriefings were a goldmine, providing insights into the structure, methods, and personnel of the KGB and its satellite services that kept analysts busy for years. He was, for all intents and purposes, a hero and a highly credible source. But then, something shifted. After he was safely resettled in the United States, Golniewski began to make a series of astonishing claims that seemed to leap from the pages of a fantastical novel. He declared that he was not Mikhail Golniewski at all. He insisted he was in fact Alexei Nikolaevich Romanov, the only son of Tsar Nicholas II and the sole surviving heir to the Russian throne, supposedly rescued from the execution cellar in Ekaterinburg in 1918. This claim was, of course, historically absurd. The fate of the Romanov family is one of the most thoroughly documented tragedies of the 20th century, with forensic and DNA evidence later confirming that all members, including Alexei, were killed. Yet Golniewski stuck to his story with fervent, unshakable conviction. He provided elaborate, if entirely implausible, details about his rescue and subsequent life in hiding, raised by a Polish family. He even began to demand that the U.S. government recognize his royal status and provide him with the financial support befitting its servage. To the CIA officers who had once celebrated him, this was a nightmare. Their prized defector, the man who had given them some of the most valuable intelligence of the Cold War, was now publicly unraveling. This dramatic turn creates the insoluble mystery at the heart of his story. Intelligence historians and psychologists have debated for decades what truly drove Mikhail Golniewski. One theory suggests that the immense psychological pressure of being a double agent, coupled with the trauma of defection and the alienation of a new life, triggered a severe psychiatric break. He may have constructed an elaborate delusion to give meaning to the immense upheaval he had experienced. Another, more cynical theory posits that it was all an act. Having delivered all the real intelligence he possessed, he may have invented this grand royal narrative as a new gambit to maintain his relevance, secure a permanent income, and continue to be the center of attention, trading on his past credibility to fuel a new, outlandish fantasy. But a third, and far more disturbing, theory has always lingered on the edges. Could his entire defection, including his initial, incredibly accurate intelligence, have been an astoundingly sophisticated deception operation by the KGB? The logic is chillingly clever. Send a genuine high-level source with real, damaging information to build immense credibility, then have him suddenly adopt a patently ridiculous story. This would achieve two goals. First, it would retroactively discredit all the intelligence he provided, allowing the Soviet Union to protect agents he might not have exposed by casting a shadow of madness over everything he ever said. Second, it would make Western agencies excessively paranoid and skeptical of future defectors, worrying that any one of them could be a time bomb of embarrassment. In this scenario, his later claims weren't a breakdown, but the final, masterful phase of his mission. Without access to Polish and Soviet intelligence archives, we may never know if Golniewski was a hero who broke, a clever fraudster, or the most brilliantly manipulated pawn in the history of espionage, his true identity and motives lost in the hall of mirrors he helped to build. But just as the West was grappling with the psychological enigma of Golniewski, a real-world operation was unfolding in the dusty streets of Cairo that would create a political firestorm of its own, one built on denial and shrouded in official secrecy for decades. In the simmering summer of 1954, a series of mysterious explosions rocked Cairo and Alexandria. Small incendiary devices were set off inside post offices and American cultural centers, and while the damage was minimal, the intended psychological impact was meant to be enormous. The goal was to create a wave of anti-Western sentiment and instability within Egypt, making it appear as though violent Egyptian nationalists were running amok. This, the plotters believed, would convince the British government to keep its troops stationed in the Suez Canal zone, a vital strategic asset. The operation was a catastrophic failure. Egyptian authorities quickly rounded up the cell, and the subsequent trial revealed a stunning truth. The bombers were not Egyptian nationalists at all. They were Israeli Jews. This botched mission, which would become infamous as the Lavon Affair or the Unfortunate Affair, is a masterclass in plausible deniability and bureaucratic betrayal. The central, burning question was never about who carried out the attacks. That was clear from the public trial. The mystery that has tormented Israeli politics for 70 years is a simple one: who gave the final order? At the time, the Minister of Defense was Pinhas Lavon, a sharp and ambitious politician. When news of the failed operation reached Tel Aviv, Lavon immediately and vehemently denied any knowledge or authorization, claiming the local Mossad station chief in Egypt had acted recklessly and far beyond his authority. He pointed the finger squarely at military intelligence. The military intelligence chiefs, in turn, pointed right back at Lavon, insisting they would never have greenlit such a risky operation without direct approval from the very top. The resulting scandal was so toxic, it forced Lavon to resign in disgrace, and the incident was officially buried by the Israeli government for years. Yet, the whispers never stopped. The heart of the mystery lies in the conflicting testimonies and the convenient destruction of key documents. Was Pinhas Lavon truly the architect, a defense minister who authorized a rogue operation and then cowardly threw his subordinates under the bus when it failed? Or was he the victim of a conspiratorial setup by a defense establishment that saw him as an outsider and wanted him gone? The plot thickens when you consider the role of David Ben-Gurion, Israel's founding father and a political titan who had temporarily stepped back from the premiership, but was still the dominant figure in the country's security apparatus. Some historians and investigators have long suspected that Ben-Gurion, or his powerful proteges like Moshe Dayan and Shimon Peres in the defense ministry, may have been aware of or even approved the plan, only to sacrifice Levin as a convenient scapegoat when everything went wrong. This theory suggests the operation was too significant, with too many moving parts, to have been launched by a mid-level officer without at least a tacit nod from someone far more powerful. The controversy refused to die. In the 1960s, new evidence emerged that seemed to partially exonerate Levin, leading to a fierce political battle that bitterly divided the nation and ultimately contributed to Ben-Gurion's final resignation. But a definitive answer remained elusive. Key files were allegedly lost or destroyed. Witnesses gave contradictory accounts under oath. The truth became a political football, with different factions embracing whichever version of events best suited their agenda. The Levin affair is more than just a historical whodunit. It is a permanent stain on the conscience of a young nation, a case that exposed the brutal internal power struggles lurking beneath the surface of its democratic ideals. It forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. In the shadowy world of intelligence and state security, how often are convenient fall guys chosen to absorb the blow of a failed policy, their careers and reputations destroyed to protect the powerful figures who remain forever in the shadows, their involvement a secret they take to the grave? For Israel, the question of who gave the order in 1954 remains officially unresolved, a ghost of suspicion that still haunts the corridors of power. In the shadowy world of espionage, few figures shine with as tragic a light as Noor Inayat Khan, a woman whose story is one of immense bravery, shrouded in heartbreaking mystery. While the broad strokes of her service are well documented, the precise details of her downfall in Nazi-occupied France remain a subject of intense debate and sorrow. Noor was an unlikely spy. A direct descendant of Tipu Sultan, the Muslim ruler of Mysore, she was a Sufi pacifist and a celebrated children's author and musician living in Paris. When the war began, her deep sense of justice and opposition to the Nazi regime compelled her to join the British Women's Auxiliary Air Force, and later, due to her fluency in French, she was recruited into the Special Operations Executive, the SOE. This was Churchill's infamous Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, tasked with setting Europe ablaze through sabotage and subversion. Her code name was Madeleine, and she was sent into France as a wireless operator, one of the most dangerous jobs imaginable. Her mission was to maintain the vital communication link between the Prosper Resistance network in Paris and London. The Gestapo was ruthlessly efficient at hunting radio operators, using direction-finding vans to triangulate their signals. The average life expectancy for an SOE wireless operator in occupied France was brutally short, just 6 weeks. Noor knew the risks, but she volunteered anyway. For 3 months, she was the only lifeline for the entire network, moving constantly, transmitting under incredibly dangerous conditions, and miraculously evading capture even as the Gestapo closed in. Her coolness under pressure and dedication were extraordinary. Then, in October 1943, the trap finally sprung. The Gestapo arrested her at her safe house. What happened next is where the clear history becomes a murky puzzle of betrayal and misfortune. The official German report stated simply that she was caught due to well-directed counter-espionage measures. But many historians and former SOE agents believe there was far more to the story. The most painful and persistent theory points to a betrayal from within. The Prosper network had already been severely compromised months earlier, with hundreds of arrests. A key figure in this collapse was a Frenchwoman named Henri Dericourt, the SOE's air movements officer in France. Dericourt was later accused of being a double agent working for the German Sicherheitsdienst, or SD. It is alleged that he systematically handed over information about incoming agents and operations to his German handlers. While he was eventually cleared by a British tribunal after the war, the cloud of suspicion never fully left him. Could Dericourt have been the one who revealed Noor's identity or location? Another potential source of the betrayal was much closer to home. There is compelling evidence that the Gestapo had turned other members of the fractured resistance network. After her arrest, the Germans executed a brilliant and cruel deception. They took control of her wireless set and her codes. Knowing London relied on her signals, they began transmitting messages back to England, impersonating her. For weeks, they successfully fooled her SOE controllers, even requesting and receiving drops of supplies and money, all of which fell directly into German hands. This ruse, known as a Funkspiel, or radio game, was devastatingly effective. The lingering question is, how did the Germans know enough about her codes and her unique security checks that the deliberate mistakes an operator would include to verify their identity, to make the deception so convincing? Some believe it had to involve someone who knew her protocols intimately, perhaps another captured and broken agent who provided the final pieces of the puzzle. Noor's courage did not end with her capture. She was interrogated relentlessly at the Gestapo headquarters on Avenue Foch, but she gave up nothing. She attempted 2 daring escapes, and despite being classified as a highly dangerous prisoner, she never signed the parole forms that would have granted her modest privileges. Her defiance was so absolute that the Nazis eventually designated her as a Nacht und Nebel, prisoner night in fog, meaning she was to be disappeared without a trace. She was eventually transferred to the Dachau concentration camp, where she was executed in September 1944. Her last word reported to be liberté. The mystery of her capture is more than a historical footnote. It is a testament to the brutal complexity of clandestine warfare, where loyalty was fragile and trust was the most dangerous commodity of all. We may never know the exact chain of events that led to her arrest, but that uncertainty itself stands as a permanent monument to the shadow war that consumed so many brave souls. During the Second World War, a voice became as familiar to American GIS in the Pacific as the sound of gunfire, yet its true source was a complete enigma. This was the haunting, seductive lure of Tokyo Rose, a nickname given by Allied troops to the female broadcasters on Japanese radio who specialized in psychological warfare. Their program, The 0 Hour, was a bizarre mix of American jazz music and carefully crafted propaganda, designed to shatter morale. The announcer would speak in perfect, American-accented English, playing nostalgic songs from home before slyly suggesting that the soldiers' wives and girlfriends were being unfaithful back in the States, that the war was already lost, and that their commanders were needlessly sacrificing them. It was a weapon aimed directly at the heart, and for many lonely soldiers, it was a strange, comforting, yet deeply unsettling daily ritual. But here's where the mystery takes root. Tokyo Rose was never one woman. It was a propaganda construct, a character played by at least a dozen different English-speaking women of various nationalities working for Radio Tokyo. However, in the public imagination, and particularly in the American press, she was condensed into a single, infamous traitor. At the end of the war, the U.S. government was under immense public pressure to find and punish this legendary figure. Their search zeroed in on a young Japanese-American woman named Iva Toguri. Her story is not just one of espionage or propaganda, but a profound tragedy of identity, coercion, and a nation's desperate need for a villain. Iva Toguri was an unlikely candidate for a master propagandist. A native of Los Angeles and a graduate of UCLA, she was in Japan visiting sick relatives in 1941, a trip that turned into a nightmare when the attack on Pearl Harbor stranded her there. As an American citizen who refused to renounce her nationality, she was denied a food ration card and was treated with suspicion by the Japanese authorities, effectively becoming an enemy alien in her ancestral homeland. Struggling to survive, she eventually took a menial job as a typist at Radio Tokyo. It was there that she was eventually pressured into taking a microphone. Allied prisoners of war who were forced to work on the broadcasts later testified that she was the least enthusiastic of the announcers, often delivering her scripts with a noticeable lack of conviction. They even gave her the nickname, Orphan Anne, for her lonely, sorrowful demeanor, a stark contrast to the vicious siren the troops imagined. After the war, she was initially cleared by the FBI after a lengthy interrogation. But as the myth of Tokyo Rose grew in American newspapers, the government, facing a public hungry for retribution, decided it needed a scalp. Iva Toguri was arrested a second time and brought to trial in San Francisco in 1949. The case against her was spectacularly weak, built on the perjured testimony of witnesses who later recanted their stories and fueled by a media frenzy. that had already convicted her in the court of public opinion. Despite a lack of concrete evidence that she had ever uttered the most treasonous lines attributed to Tokyo Rose, she was found guilty of one count of treason and sentenced to 10 years in prison. She served 6.5 years, was stripped of her citizenship, and was deported. The true, unresolved mystery at the heart of the Tokyo Rose story is not about the broadcasts themselves, but about the nature of Iva Toguri's participation and the motives of those who pursued her. Was she a willing participant in Japan's propaganda machine, or was she, as she and the POWs who worked with her maintained, a coerced asset doing the bare minimum to survive under duress? The historical consensus now strongly leans toward the latter, viewing her as a scapegoat for a nation's wartime anger. The deeper, more unsettling question is why the U.S. Justice Department proceeded with such a flimsy case. Was it a simple capitulation to public and political pressure? Or was there a more calculated motive to use her conviction to send a chilling message to other Japanese Americans returning from the internment camps? In 1977, following a major investigation by journalists, she was granted a full pardon by President Gerald Ford and had her citizenship restored, a belated acknowledgement of a grave injustice. Yet the pardon didn't fully solve the mystery. It merely officially recognized that the truth had been sacrificed long ago on the altar of wartime sentiment, leaving the real story of what happened inside those radio studios forever blurred by time, fear, and the powerful need for a convenient enemy. In the chaotic and shadowy world of the French Resistance, where trust was a currency more valuable than gold, few figures were as enigmatic as the man known only as the Ghost of St. Mitchell. His story is not one of a single dramatic act, but of a lingering, nebulous doubt that has never been resolved. Unlike the clear-cut heroes and villains of popular history, the Ghost operated in the murky twilight, leaving behind a trail of actions so contradictory that even his former comrades could never agree on whether he was their most valuable asset or their most devastating betrayer. The man, whose real identity remains one of the Resistance's most closely guarded secrets, earned his spectral nickname for his uncanny ability to move through Nazi-occupied Paris unseen. He was a master of disguise and deception, a courier who could slip through German checkpoints with impunity, delivering messages and smuggling weapons for a key resistance cell operating out of the St. Mitchell district. His value was immeasurable. He seemed to possess a preternatural sense of danger, often warning the network of impending Gestapo raids mere moments before they occurred. To the members of his cell, he appeared to be blessed with an almost divine protection, a guardian spirit watching over them. This perceived invincibility is what first planted the seed of suspicion. In an environment where capture and torture were a constant reality, how could one man operate with such flawless success for so long? To some, it began to feel less like luck and more like immunity. The central mystery that defines his legacy erupted in the spring of 1944. The Ghost brought the cell what he claimed was his greatest intelligence coup yet: detailed plans for a German ammunition train passing through a rural area outside Paris. He urged the resistance to ambush it, promising a propaganda victory that would galvanize the region. The cell's leader, a man code named Pascal, trusted the Ghost implicitly and greenlit the operation. But the ambush was a trap. As the resistance fighters moved in, they were not met with a vulnerable train, but with a company of waiting SS troops. The resulting firefight was a massacre. Pascal and most of the cell's key fighters were killed outright or captured, and later executed. The network was decimated in a single, brutal stroke. In the devastating aftermath, only the Ghost was unaccounted for. He had vanished from the scene without a trace. This single fact split the surviving members into two bitterly opposed camps. One faction believed the Ghost had been a German double agent all along, a Gestapo plant whose entire purpose was to gain the cell's trust and then orchestrate its destruction. They pointed to his miraculous escapes and his intimate knowledge of German movements as evidence that he was being fed information from the other side. The ambush was his masterstroke, the final, bloody culmination of his long deception. The other faction clung to a more tragic, but no less haunting, theory. They argued that the Ghost was indeed loyal, but that his own legendary success had made him overconfident. They believed his intelligence source for the train, a contact whose identity he took to his grave, had been compromised or was themselves a double agent. In this version, the ghost was an unwitting pawn, a loyal fighter who delivered a poisoned chalice, then either died in the ambush unknown or, shattered by guilt and branded a traitor by his own side, chose to disappear forever into the fog of war. The truth was buried by the chaos of the liberation and the subsequent desire to move forward. After the war, official French military investigations were inconclusive. His file, reportedly, contains interviews with Gestapo officers who denied any knowledge of an agent matching his description, a statement that could be either a final lie or a shocking truth. The ghost of St. Mitchell was never seen again. He left no family to claim him, no photograph to identify him, only a ghost story whispered among aging former resistance fighters. He is a permanent question mark in the history of the resistance, a reminder that in the Hall of Mirrors that was clandestine warfare, the line between savior and saboteur was often invisible, and sometimes it was never drawn at all. While the ghost of St. Mitchell represents a single, haunting mystery from the wartime era, the Soviet Union was perfecting an espionage strategy that created not just one ghost, but an entire invisible army. Imagine a spy who isn't a diplomat with a fancy title and legal immunity, but a next-door neighbor. They have no official connection to their home country. They speak the local language without an accent. They understand the culture's nuances. They hold a normal job, and they blend in so perfectly that they become, for all intents and purposes, someone you would never look at twice. This was the terrifying genius of the KGB's illegals program. A long-term, deep-cover operation so patient and so secretive that its full scope is almost certainly still unknown, with agents who may have lived and died in plain sight, their true loyalties and accomplishments never discovered. The term illegal, in this context, doesn't refer to someone who broke the law to become a spy. It specifically denotes an intelligence officer operating without the protection of diplomatic cover. While legal spies worked out of embassies and could be expelled if caught, an illegal was entirely on their own. Their entire life was a meticulously constructed legend, a false identity so deep and so detailed that it could withstand decades of scrutiny. The training for these operatives was exhaustive and brutal. They learned not just how to gather intelligence, but how to be someone else. They studied the minutiae of their target country, its slang, its popular culture, its regional customs, even the correct way to fold a newspaper or order a coffee. They were masters of tradecraft, able to conduct dead drops, clandestine meetings, and covert communications with a level of skill that made them virtually undetectable. Their missions were not quick smash-and-grab affairs. They were marathons measured in years, sometimes even decades. An illegal might spend 5 years simply establishing a credible career and building a social network before they were ever activated for a single intelligence task. We know this program existed because, on rare occasions, an illegal was caught. The most famous modern example is the group of 10 Russian sleeper agents arrested in the United States in 2010, an event that inspired the television show The Americans. Their methods were a textbook example of the illegals' craft. They assumed stolen American identities, lived in suburban homes, held ordinary jobs, and used sophisticated wireless communication techniques to send messages back to Moscow Center. But their arrest, rather than revealing the full extent of the program, only served to highlight its incredible depth. These 10 were a single cell, a tiny fraction of a system that had been running since the Cold War and almost certainly continues to run in some form today. The truly unsettling question is not about the ones we caught, but about the ones we didn't. How many other illegals successfully embedded themselves in Western governments, intelligence agencies, corporate boardrooms, and research laboratories, never raising a single suspicion? The historical record provides chilling clues that suggest the program's successes were far greater than we will ever fully know. There are infamous cases like that of Jack Barsky, who lived as an American for decades under a stolen identity before finally being extracted. Or the story of Reino Heihanen, an illegal who defected to the FBI in 1957 and exposed his famous colleague, Rudolf Abel, revealing a network that had been operating with impunity for years. Each exposed illegal was like finding a single piece of a massive, global jigsaw puzzle where most of the pieces are still missing. The intelligence they gathered wasn't always dramatic stolen documents. Sometimes, the most damaging intelligence is simply influence. An illegal placed in a position of trust within a political party, a news organization, or a lobbying firm could subtly shape policy, spread disinformation, or identify other potential recruits for years without ever committing a prosecutable crime. This leads us to the program's most enduring and unresolved mystery. The Soviet Union invested immense resources into the illegals program over generations. The logical conclusion is that it worked. We have to assume that among the many who were caught or recalled, there were numerous stunning successes agents who penetrated the highest levels of Western society, provided priceless intelligence, and retired quietly with pensions and medals in Moscow, their true careers forever a state secret. Their files are locked in the archives of the SVR, the modern successor to the KGB's foreign intelligence arm. These are not the stories of flamboyant double agents. They are the stories of the quiet, patient professionals who won the secret, silent battles of the Cold War without a single shot being fired or a single headline being written. The legacy of the illegals program is a permanent cloud of suspicion, a reminder that the most dangerous secrets are not always hidden in safes, but are living and breathing among us, their truths buried so deep they may never come to light. Yet while the Soviets were masters of planting invisible agents, their methods for dealing with perceived intruders were anything but subtle. On a cold June morning in 1952, a Swedish Air Force Catalina seaplane was flying a routine reconnaissance mission over the Baltic Sea. The crew's objective was to search for any sign of a missing Swedish military plane that had vanished days earlier. The flight was logged and authorized, a seemingly straightforward operation in international waters. Without any warning, Soviet Mi-15 fighter jets appeared, opened fire, and blasted the unarmed Catalina out of the sky. The attack was swift and brutal, but the aftermath, a tangled web of denial, contradictory claims, and enduring secrecy, would transform this tragic event into one of the Cold War's most contentious unsolved mysteries, known forever as the Catalina Affair. The official Soviet explanation was as simple as it was infuriating. They claimed the Swedish aircraft had violated their airspace and was engaged as a hostile intruder. The Swedish government and the international community were outraged. They presented flight logs and navigational data proving their plane was miles away from Soviet territory, flying well within international airspace. This was more than a diplomatic incident. It was an act of unprovoked aggression that left 3 crewmen injured and forced the 8 survivors to endure a grueling 2-month ordeal in Soviet prisons before they were finally released. On the surface, it appeared to be a stark case of Soviet paranoia and brutality, a trigger-happy pilot mistaking a search and rescue plane for a threat. But as with so many Cold War events, the surface story is rarely the whole truth, and the Catalina's true mission has been fiercely debated for over 70 years. The heart of the mystery lies in the question of intent. Was the Catalina truly on a simple, humanitarian search mission, as Sweden always maintained? Or was it, as the Soviets alleged and many analysts have since suspected, on an electronic intelligence gathering operation, a spy flight disguised as a rescue mission? The context is critical. The early 1950s were a period of extreme tension. The Cold War was freezing over, and the Baltic Sea was a particularly hot zone for clandestine activity. Western intelligence agencies were desperate for any information on Soviet radar capabilities, air defense protocols, and military installations along the strategically vital Baltic coast. It was common practice to use seemingly innocent flights, whether planes, search and rescue missions as cover for eavesdropping operations. These planes would be packed with sophisticated recording equipment designed to passively scoop up Soviet radar signals and radio communications, painting a detailed picture of their defensive network. This is where the mystery of the missing Swedish military plane becomes deeply significant. Some historians and former intelligence officers have long speculated that the initial disappearance of that plane was not an accident, but was itself the result of it being shot down by the Soviets after straying too close or during its own intelligence mission. In this theory, the Catalina sent to find it was not just looking for wreckage. it was also tasked with listening, its crew monitoring Soviet air traffic control frequencies to see if the Russians would inadvertently reveal details about the first plane's fate. The Soviet MiGS, aware of this electronic eavesdropping, would have had a very different motive for their attack than simple territorial defense. They wouldn't just be shooting down an intruder. They would be eliminating an intelligence asset that was actively harvesting their secrets. The Swedish government has always vehemently denied this espionage angle, and the released official documents from the time support the search and rescue narrative. Yet, a cloud of suspicion remains for several compelling reasons. The first is the sheer ferocity of the Soviet response. Attacking an unarmed plane in international waters was a drastic and politically risky move, even for Stalin's USSR. It suggests they believed the Catalina was engaged in an activity so damaging that it warranted an aggressive public response. The second reason is the pattern of behavior. Both the United States and its allies, including Sweden, were actively conducting such espionage flights throughout the Cold War. It would be highly unusual for Sweden, a neutral nation with advanced technical capabilities and a strategic interest in monitoring its powerful eastern neighbor, to not be involved in such efforts. The third, and perhaps most telling, clue is the fate of the survivors. During their interrogation in Soviet prisons, the crew reported being intensely questioned not about their search patterns for the missing plane, but about the technical specifications of their aircraft's radio and navigation equipment. Their captors seemed obsessed with what their plane could hear, not what it could see. So we are left with two equally plausible, yet completely incompatible, versions of history. The first is Sweden's official story, a tragic case of mistaken identity and Soviet aggression against a peaceful humanitarian mission. The second is the darker, whispered theory, that the Catalina was indeed on a spy flight, that the Soviets caught them in the act, and that the Swedish government could never admit this without exposing its own clandestine operations and violating its cherished neutrality. The truth likely lies in a classified file in a Swedish intelligence archive or in a forgotten KGB vault in Moscow. Until those files are opened, the Catalina affair remains a perfect symbol of the Cold War's moral ambiguity, where nothing was ever as simple as it seemed, and where the ghosts of 8 surviving airmen are forever caught between being remembered as rescuers or as spies. But for all the patient, invisible work of the illegals program, the most successful deceptions often required a single, brilliant, and macabre stroke of theater. In the spring of 1943, the Allies were preparing to invade Sicily, an operation everyone knew was coming, including the German High Command. The island was the obvious next stepping stone in the campaign. To succeed, the Allies needed to convince Hitler that the real blow would fall somewhere else anywhere else. And so, British intelligence launched one of the most audacious and bizarre deception plans of the entire war, an operation that would become immortalized as the man who never was. The plan, conceived by Naval Intelligence Officer Ewan Montagu and his team, was breathtaking in its simplicity and its sheer audacity. They would allow false, top-secret documents detailing the imminent invasion of Sardinia and Greece to fall into German hands. The problem, of course, was how to deliver such sensitive papers in a way the enemy would find completely believable. Their solution was as ingenious as it was gruesome. They would use a corpse. They would dress the body in the uniform of a Royal Marines officer, attach a briefcase containing the forged letters to his wrist, and drop him from a submarine off the coast of Spain, where strong currents and known German spy networks would ensure he was found. The story would be that a courier's plane had crashed at sea, and his body had washed ashore carrying his vital dispatches. Every detail was meticulously crafted to sell the lie. The body itself was that of a homeless man, Glinder Michael, who had died from ingesting rat poison. This was crucial, as a post-mortem would need to show a cause of death consistent with drowning at sea, not a bullet wound or other trauma. The team created an entire life for their fictional Major William Martin. They filled his pockets with everyday items to build his legend, love letters and a photograph from a fictional fiancée named Pam, theater ticket stubs, a receipt for an engagement ring, and even overdue bill notices to add a touch of mundane reality. He was not a perfect, sterile officer. He was a believably flawed human being who just happened to be carrying the war's biggest secret, The operation, codenamed Mincemeat, went off flawlessly. The body was recovered by a Spanish fisherman, and just as planned, the documents were examined by German intelligence agents working with sympathetic Spanish officials before being quietly returned to the British. The ruse appeared to be a complete success. Ultra-decrypts of German communications soon revealed that the Wehrmacht High Command had taken the bait entirely. Hitler himself was convinced, ordering forces to be diverted from Sicily to reinforce Sardinia, Corsica, and Greece. When the Allies landed on Sicily in July, they met far less resistance than anticipated, undoubtedly saving thousands of lives. Yet, for all its celebrated success, Operation Mincemeat holds onto two deeply intriguing mysteries. The first is a question of identity that borders on the ethical. For decades, the official record held that the body used was the penniless Glyndwr Michael, but in the years since, alternative theories have emerged. Some historians have put forward a compelling case that the body was actually that of a sailor who had died in an accident aboard a Royal Navy ship, a man whose family was never told how his remains were used. The Ministry of Defense has always maintained the Glyndwr Michael story, even adding a carved acknowledgement to his gravestone. But the lack of definitive, publicly available medical records and the intense secrecy surrounding the operation have kept this first mystery alive. Was he the man history remembers, or was he another unknown soul? His final contribution to the war effort as anonymous in death as it was vital. The second, and far more strategically significant mystery, is whether the Germans truly fell for the plot as completely as the ultra-intercepts suggested. While the diversion of German troops is a matter of historical record, some intelligence analysts have pondered a more complex possibility. Could German counterintelligence, specifically the Abwehr, have suspected a ruse but been overruled by a paranoid Hitler who was predisposed to believe an attack was coming in the Balkans? Or perhaps more intriguingly, did the Abwehr, which by 1943 was known to be infiltrated by anti-Nazi elements, allow the deception to succeed? It is a tantalizing thought that officers within the German intelligence apparatus who secretly wanted the war to end saw through the plan but chose to endorse it, effectively aiding the Allied invasion by their silence. There is no smoking gun to prove this theory, only the curious fact that such an elaborate scheme hinged on so many variables going perfectly right. The official files, some still classified, likely hold the final answer, leaving us to wonder if the man who never was fooled everyone, or if his silent journey was aided by unseen hands on the other side, making his mission a success through a secret, unspoken collaboration. But while Operation Mincemeat was a macabre fiction designed to save lives, our next case involves a real-life weapon that was both brutally efficient and utterly fantastical. An assassination so public and yet so perfectly concealed that its mechanics remain a subject of fierce debate to this day. On a busy London street in September 1978, a Bulgarian dissident named Georgi Markov was waiting for a bus near Waterloo Bridge when he felt a sudden, sharp sting in the back of his right thigh. He turned to see a man behind him fumbling with an umbrella, who promptly muttered an apology in a foreign accent before quickly hailing a taxi and disappearing into the city traffic. Within hours, Markov developed a high fever. 3 days later, he was dead, the victim of one of the Cold War's most infamous and technically baffling assassinations, an event that would forever be known as the Bulgarian umbrella murder. The official cause of death, confirmed by a painstaking autopsy, was ricin poisoning, a toxin so lethal that a dose the size of a pinhead is enough to kill an adult human. Ricin works by inhibiting protein synthesis within cells, essentially causing the body to shut down. There is no antidote, but how was it delivered? The assassin's weapon was no ordinary umbrella. The Metropolitan Police investigation, one of the most extensive in British history, concluded that it had been ingeniously modified into a pneumatic weapon. The theory posits that the tip of the umbrella was replaced with a hollow metal pellet, smaller than a pinhead, which contained the ricin. A compressed gas cylinder within the umbrella's shaft would have fired this tiny projectile into Markov's leg with the force of an air rifle, delivering the lethal dose. The sting Markov felt was this pellet breaking the skin before it dissolved. leaving the ricin to do its grim work. It was a weapon that belonged in a James Bond film, yet it was deployed in the heart of London with chilling precision. The mystery, however, does not lie in the what or the why. It is universally accepted that Markov was killed by the Bulgarian Secret Service, almost certainly with the assistance and technical expertise of the KGB, in retaliation for his defection and his devastatingly effective anti-communist broadcasts on the BBC World Service and Radio Free Europe. The enduring puzzles are in the how and the who. First, the technical method. While the pellet theory is the most widely accepted explanation, it has never been definitively proven. No such pellet was ever found in Markov's leg during the autopsy. Some toxicologists and weapons experts have proposed alternative delivery mechanisms, suggesting the umbrella could have been designed to inject a liquid or gel form of ricin through a tiny needle, a method that would leave even less of a trace. The exact engineering of this unique assassination tool remains locked away in KGB or Bulgarian intelligence archives, a secret they have fiercely guarded. The second, and perhaps more tantalizing, mystery is the identity of the hitman himself. Despite a massive manhunt and numerous promising leads, he was never caught. The most widely suspected individual is an Italian man named Francesco Galino, codenamed Piccadilly by Bulgarian intelligence. A petty art smuggler and low-level agent, Galino was known to be in London at the time and fit the general description of the umbrella-wielding assassin. He was even interviewed by Danish police in the 1990s after his name surfaced in connection with the case, but he vehemently denied any involvement and no charges were ever brought. The evidence against him is compelling but entirely circumstantial. Other theories point to a known Danish assassin of Norwegian descent, or even a team of operatives working in tandem. The assassin's cool professionalism and flawless escape suggest a highly experienced, perhaps even legendary, KGB wetwork specialist who was flown in for this single, high-priority job, and then vanished back into the shadows without a trace. The case remains officially open with Scotland Yard, a testament to its insolvable nature. The deepest secrets of the Bulgarian umbrella died with the communist regimes that commissioned it. The specific metallurgy of the pellet, the exact design schematics for the weapon, and the true name of the man who carried it out are pieces of a puzzle that may never be fully assembled. It stands as a stark monument to the Cold War's ruthlessness, a reminder that in that shadow conflict, the most outlandish and cinematic methods were not just fantasy, but a terrifying reality played out on the streets of a modern European capital, leaving behind a medical and forensic mystery that continues to intrigue and horrify in equal measure. And while the perfect deception of Operation Mincemeat changed the course of a battle, a spy operating in the very heart of the Axis alliance was trying to change the course of the entire war, only to have his most critical warnings vanish into the ether. In the tense spring of 1941, as the world held its breath, one man knew a cataclysm was coming. His name was Richard Sorge, and he was arguably the most successful spy of the 20th century. A journalist living a dazzling life in Tokyo, who was secretly the Soviet Union's top intelligence asset in Asia. His network, code-named the Ramsay Group, had penetrated the highest levels of the German embassy and the Japanese government. He was so well connected that he often learned of decisions in Berlin before the Japanese foreign minister did. And in the months leading up to June 22, 1941, he was sending a desperate, continuous stream of messages to Moscow Center, each one more specific than the last, detailing Hitler's precise plan to break the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact and invade the USSR. He provided the exact date of the attack, the number of divisions being mobilized, even the overarching strategic blueprint for Operation Barbarossa. The tragedy, of course, is that Stalin refused to believe him. The Soviet dictator was so paranoid about disinformation and so convinced Hitler would not attack on two fronts that he dismissed Sorge's intelligence as provocation, branding him a liar and a double agent. The warnings were ignored, and the Nazi invasion achieved almost total surprise, nearly destroying the Soviet Union in the opening months of the war. This part of the story is well known, a classic tale of intelligence failure at the highest level. But the deeper, more tantalizing mystery surrounding Richard Sorge involves the messages that were sent after the invasion began, specifically his final, unrecovered communications in the autumn of 1941. We know he sent them, we know Moscow received them, but their full contents remain one of the great unresolved puzzles of World War II espionage, because the pages that could have answered our questions were almost certainly burned. After proving his credibility beyond any doubt with the flawless prediction of Barbarossa, Sorge turned his attention to the other looming strategic question: would Japan attack the Soviet Union from the east? Stalin was terrified of a two-front war, and he had kept 1 million troops stationed in Siberia to defend against this very possibility, troops that were desperately needed to stop the German advance on Moscow. Sorge's new mission was to find out Japan's intentions. Through his impeccable sources, including the German ambassador Eugen Ott and influential figures in the Japanese cabinet, he determined that Japan had made a fundamental strategic decision. They would not strike north into Siberia. Instead, they would turn their attention south, toward the oil-rich colonies of Southeast Asia and the Pacific, a path that would inevitably lead to war with the United States and Great Britain. This was the crown jewel of Sorge's espionage career. In a series of messages in September and early October 1941, he reassured Moscow that the Soviet Far East was safe. This intelligence was the green light Stalin needed. He immediately began transferring his vast Siberian armies westward. These fresh, winter-hardened divisions arrived just in time to launch the critical counteroffensive that saved Moscow from capture in December 1941, a pivotal turning point in the war. Historians largely agree that Sorge's intelligence directly enabled this victory. But here is where the mystery takes root. Sorge was arrested by the Japanese secret police on October 18, 1941. In his final days of freedom, he was sending a flurry of messages. We know the broad theme was Japan's southern strategy, but the specific, granular details within those final transmissions have been lost to history. The Soviet Union, upon learning of his arrest, would have immediately purged their files related to him to protect their sources and methods. The Japanese, after they tortured and tried him, executed him in 1944 and likely destroyed the bulk of their interrogation records at the end of the war. So we are left with fragments and whispers. Did Sorge's final messages contain an explicit warning about the impending attack on Pearl Harbor? He knew war with America was Japan's goal, and he knew it was coming soon. He had even provided the exact number of divisions Japan was allocating to the southern push. But did he have a specific date or target? It seems unlikely, as that would have been an immensely closely held secret even within the Japanese high command. A more plausible, yet equally significant, theory is that his last reports contained devastatingly detailed information about the political infighting within the Japanese government, the weaknesses in the German-Japanese alliance, or the identity of other, still unknown Soviet agents in the region. His network was vast, and his knowledge was profound. Those final messages weren't just about military plans. They were a comprehensive portrait of the Axis mindscape at a critical juncture. Their loss means we only understand a part of the picture Sorge so masterfully painted, and we are left to wonder what other world-altering insights were contained in those last, desperate signals from a spy who knew his time was running out. While we often focus on the spies we caught or the networks we shattered, history is also written in the negative space. In the unsettling silence of operations that were so perfectly executed, they left behind nothing but whispers. This brings us to one of the most persistent and eerie legends of the Cold War, the rumor of entire spy rings that were never uncovered, networks that operated with such flawless secrecy that they vanished without a trace, leaving intelligence agencies to chase ghosts. Perhaps no alleged group embodies this mystery more than the whispers of a vast, unseen Soviet apparatus embedded throughout Scandinavia. A network that allegedly left behind a trail of cryptic clues, but not a single, officially confirmed agent. Scandinavia, with its long, remote borders and strategic position between the Soviet Union and the North Atlantic, was a prime espionage battleground. For Western agencies, it was a crucial listening post. For the KGB, it was a backdoor into Europe. The region was thick with known spies on both sides, but the legend speaks of something deeper and more sinister. A second hidden layer of operatives so well buried they were never activated, or if they were, their work was so discreet it was never detected. The evidence for this phantom network is not found in court transcripts or declassified arrest warrants, but in a series of bizarre and unexplained incidents that, when pieced together, form a picture of a terrifyingly efficient machine. The clues are as tantalizing as they are inconclusive. There were the repeated, inexplicable breaches at highly secure Norwegian military installations, where top-secret NATO documents concerning coastal defense and sonar technology seemed to vanish into thin air, with no evidence of a break-in and no viable suspects among the thoroughly vetted staff. In Sweden, counterintelligence officials tracked a pattern of sophisticated, untraceable short-wave radio transmissions emanating from the remote northern forests, broadcasts that used a cipher never broken and ceased the moment direction-finding vans got close. Then there were the ghost drops, dead letter boxes discovered by sheer accident that contained microfilm or cash, but which were never staked out successfully and never led to an arrest. The most compelling and strangest piece of evidence emerged from the defection of a mid-level KGB archivist in the 1970s. In his debriefing, he mentioned in passing a file he had once seen referring to a network of sleepers in the snow, agents placed in Scandinavia decades prior, who were to be activated only in the event of a full-scale war. He could provide no names, only the cryptic code name, Operation Pohjola, a reference to the mystical, far north realm of Finnish folklore. The existence of such a network makes terrifying strategic sense. In the event of a hot war between NATO and the Warsaw Pact, the Soviet Northern Fleet would need to break out into the Atlantic. To do this, they would require real-time intelligence on NATO ship movements, the placement of minefields, and the readiness of coastal defense batteries. A group of deep cover agents, perhaps fishermen, shipping clerks, or even low-level government workers planted years in advance and living utterly normal lives, would be infinitely more valuable than any embassy-based spy. They would be the eyes and ears for a naval assault, and their anonymity would be their greatest weapon. The fact that no such ring was ever rolled up is either a testament to its perfect secrecy or proof that it never existed outside of paranoid contingency plans and the boasts of a defector. This is the heart of the mystery that continues to vex historians. Without a caught spy or a leaked document to confirm it, the legend of the Scandinavian ghost network remains in the realm of speculation. The most likely explanation is that Western counterintelligence did, in fact, manage to identify and quietly neutralize a few key players, but did so in such a secretive manner through blackmail, forced recruitment, or silent expulsion that the success was never made public, to avoid alerting the Kremlin that their operation was compromised. Alternatively, the network may have been dismantled from within. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 left countless intelligence operations in disarray, with handlers disappearing, funds drying up, and files being destroyed. A sleeper agent with no one to report to might simply have chosen to remain asleep forever, living out their life in peaceful anonymity, their secret allegiance dying with them. The truth is, we may never know if the most successful Soviet spy ring of the Cold War was the one we never found. A silent victory for the KGB that remains hidden in the quiet, everyday lives of people who may have never even known they were the stuff of legend. The world of espionage is not just a story of grand geopolitical maneuvers. Sometimes, it's a deeply personal tale of a single individual who steps into a revolution and vanishes without a trace, leaving behind a void filled with suspicion and competing narratives. This brings us to the strange and still shocking case of William Morgan, an American adventurer who fought alongside Fidel Castro, only to disappear into a Cuban prison cell. His ultimate fate and true allegiance a mystery that continues to defy explanation. William Morgan was an unlikely revolutionary, a high school dropout from Ohio with a checkered past that included arrests for smuggling and petty crime. He seemed more like a character from a noir novel than a committed ideological warrior. In 1957, driven by a thirst for adventure or perhaps a desire to escape his old life, he traveled to Cuba and joined the rebel forces fighting to overthrow the US-backed dictator Fulgencio Batista. He wasn't fighting with Castro's main group in the Sierra Maestra Mountains, but with a separate rebel army in the Escambray Mountains. Morgan quickly proved himself to be a brave and effective guerrilla commander. His leadership was instrumental in several key victories, and he rose to the rank of Comandante, one of only a handful of foreigners to ever achieve such a prestigious position in the Revolutionary Army. When Castro finally triumphed in January 1959, William Morgan was hailed as a hero, a symbol of international solidarity. But the fairy tale ended almost as soon as it began. The warm relationship between the United States and Castro's new government soured rapidly as Cuba pivoted toward the Soviet Union. Morgan, surprisingly, appeared to remain loyal to the revolution, even helping to uncover a counter-revolutionary plot. Yet in October 1959, he was suddenly arrested by Cuban state security. The charges were stunning. He was accused of being an American agent, working for the Federal Bureau of Investigation to undermine the Cuban government. After a swift and secretive trial, he was convicted of treason. On March 11, 1961, he was executed by a firing squad at the infamous La Cabaña fortress. The Cuban government presented his case as a clear-cut matter of national security. They had caught a dangerous spy. The American government's response, however, was anything but clear. Officially, Washington denied any connection to Morgan, but over the decades, a very different story has emerged from declassified documents and journalist investigations, suggesting a reality far more complex and ambiguous. It appears that William Morgan was almost certainly working with American intelligence, but the nature of that relationship is where the true mystery lies. The most widely accepted theory is that he was indeed recruited by the FBI or the CIA after he had already joined the rebels. His mission was not to overthrow Castro, but to report on the inner workings of the rebel movement and to keep an eye on the growing communist influence within it. In this version, he was a straightforward intelligence asset, a brave but ultimately exposed spy. A second, more intriguing theory posits that Morgan was a double agent, or perhaps even a triple agent. He might have begun working for the Americans, but was later discovered by Cuban intelligence. Instead of arresting him immediately, Castro's powerful intelligence chief, Ramiro Valdez, may have turned him. He could have been forced to feed false information back to his American handlers while secretly working for Cuba. A dangerous game that would have inevitably ended in his demise once his usefulness expired. This would explain why the Cubans waited so long to arrest him. They were milking his connection to U.S. intelligence for all it was worth. The third and most tragic theory is that William Morgan was a genuine idealist, a man who truly believed in the revolution's original democratic promises and became disillusioned as it veered towards communism. In this telling, his contacts with American officials may have been an attempt to warn them or to explore alternatives, actions that Castro's increasingly paranoid regime interpreted as treason. He may not have been a formal spy at all, but a man caught between two worlds, trusted by neither and sacrificed by both. His execution then was not about espionage, but about eliminating a potential rival and an inconvenient reminder of the revolution's broken promises. The full truth died with Morgan in that Havana prison courtyard. Key files remain classified in both Cuban and American archives. Was he a patriot, a traitor, or a pawn? His story is a haunting reminder that in the shadowy landscape of the Cold War, individual lives could be swept up in currents far beyond their control. Their true stories buried beneath layers of state secrecy and conflicting agendas, leaving us with a ghost whose final loyalties we may never truly know. Of all the ghosts haunting the corridors of British intelligence, few are more persistent than the specter of the second man. We know the story of the Cambridge Five, the ring of ideologically driven Soviet moles that included Kim Philby, perhaps the most damaging traitor in Western history. Philby's betrayal was so profound, so comprehensive, that it has long fueled a chilling and unresolved question. Could one man, even one as brilliantly placed as he, have accomplished so much alone? For decades, a compelling theory has whispered through the intelligence community that Philby was not the highest-ranking Soviet agent in MI6. That above him, or perhaps beside him, was another, even better protected mole, a second man whose existence would explain some of the most perplexing intelligence failures of the early Cold War. The evidence for this theory is not found in a single smoking gun, but in a pattern of anomalies that, when viewed together, form a deeply suspicious picture. The first puzzle piece is the sheer volume and precision of the Soviet Union's successes. while Philby had immense access. There were operations and pieces of information that some analysts argue fell outside his immediate purview. The most famous example is the fate of Operation Valuable in Albania. In 1949, the CIA and MI6 launched a joint paramilitary operation to infiltrate anti-communist Albanian commandos and foment an uprising against Enver Hoxha's Stalinist regime. It was a total, bloody disaster. Every single team was ambushed the moment they landed. The entire operation appeared to be perfectly anticipated by Albanian security forces, who were almost certainly tipped off by the Soviets. Philby was in a key position to have betrayed this operation, as he was the British liaison officer to the CIA for just these kinds of activities. Yet, some former intelligence officers and historians have pointed to curious timing and specific details of the compromise that suggest the information might have come from another, even more protected source within the British establishment, someone with a broader view of the overall strategic picture. This leads to the second, and perhaps most intriguing, piece of the puzzle, the curious case of Roger Hollies, the Director General of MI5 from 1956 to 1965. Hollies was the man ultimately responsible for hunting Soviet moles within the British government, yet he himself became the subject of a decades-long internal investigation. The suspicions arose from a series of baffling incidents. Under his leadership, nearly every major counterespionage operation against the Soviets seemed to falter or fail inexplicably. High-profile defectors were somehow anticipated and neutralized by the KGB before they could be fully debriefed. Most damningly, a top-secret report from a joint MI5-MI6 working group in the 1960s, tasked with re-examining old failures, concluded that there must have been a high-level Soviet penetration of British intelligence that lasted long after the Cambridge Five had been uncovered or had fled. The investigation eventually zeroed in on Hollies himself. He was interrogated multiple times after his retirement, but he vehemently denied the allegations. The official inquiries, most notably the thorough but still secret report by Lord Trend, ultimately concluded there was no evidence to prove he was a spy. Yet, the question was never fully put to rest. His supporters argue he was a competent administrator hamstrung by the brilliant deception of Philby and the others, a convenient scapegoat for a service struggling with institutional failure. His detractors, however, point to his curiously ineffective leadership and his staunch opposition to investigations that might have gotten too close to other moles as evidence of something far more sinister. The third argument for a second man is more psychological than evidential. The tradecraft of the KGB was legendary for its compartmentalization and redundancy. To place all their bets on a single asset, even one as perfectly placed as Kim Philby, would have been an enormous risk. It is far more consistent with their methods to have run multiple agents who were unknown to each other, creating overlapping rings of espionage. This way, if one was exposed, the others could remain in place. The existence of a second man, someone even more deeply buried than Philby, would be the ultimate insurance policy. This individual wouldn't necessarily have been another flamboyant, hard-drinking charmer like Philby. They could have been a quiet, methodical bureaucrat, someone who meticulously rose through the ranks of MI5 or MI6 without drawing any attention, their ideological fervor hidden behind a mask of dull efficiency. They would have been the perfect sleeper, activated not for stealing specific documents, but for subtly steering investigations away from sensitive areas, for protecting other assets, and for ensuring that the river of secrets continued to flow east, long after the Cambridge Five were just a memory. The mystery endures because the evidence is purely circumstantial and fiercely contested. The official line remains that the Cambridge Five were the core of the Soviet penetration, and that the various intelligence failures can be attributed to their brilliant work and the institutional arrogance of a British establishment that refused to believe men of their class could be traitors. To admit the possibility of a second man is to acknowledge that the cancer of betrayal might have gone even deeper than anyone dared imagine, that the very heart of the secret state might have been compromised for generations. The files that could settle the debate, particularly those concerning the investigation into Roger Hollies, remain under lock and key, classified in the interest of national security. This leaves us with a haunting and unresolved legacy of doubt, a shadow that stretches across decades, forcing us to wonder if the most damaging spy of the Cold War was not the man we caught, but the one we never even suspected. Every nation guards its secrets, but few have been forced to take such drastic, final measures to protect them as Poland did in those desperate final days of peace in 1939. We've already explored the monumental achievement of the Polish Cipher Bureau, the mathematicians who first cracked the German Enigma cipher and handed that priceless knowledge to the Allies. But their story has a second, far more tragic chapter, one defined not by brilliance, but by a heartbreaking act of deliberate destruction. As German panzers massed on the border and the skies darkened with the promise of invasion, the keepers of Poland's greatest intelligence secret faced an agonizing decision. They could not allow their work, their machines, and their methods to fall into Nazi hands, and so they did the only thing they could. They set out to erase their own legacy, creating a historical black hole that continues to swallow answers to this very day. The order to destroy the evidence was given in the chaotic final week of August. The staff of the Cipher Bureau, along with key military intelligence officers, knew the war was lost before the first shot was even fired. Their priorities shifted from winning to denying the enemy. In a quiet, methodical, and profoundly sorrowful ceremony, they gathered the physical proof of their greatest triumph. The pain they must have felt is almost unimaginable. This wasn't just equipment, it was the culmination of years of painstaking work, a national achievement that had given a vulnerable nation a fighting chance. They took their precious, hand-built replicas of the Enigma machine, the very devices that had proven the German cipher was not unbreakable, and they smashed them. They gathered the voluminous files, the thousands of decrypted messages, the mathematical equations that had unlocked the rotor settings, the blueprints for their Bombe code-breaking machines, and every last internal memo. And they burned it all. They committed the entire history of their operation to the flames, watching as years of work turned to ash, ensuring that when the Germans arrived, they would find nothing but a few scorched marks on the ground. This act of sacrifice was an astounding success from a counterintelligence perspective. When the German forces overran the Cipher Bureau's facilities, they found nothing. The secret of the broken Enigma remained safe, allowing the British at Bletchley Park to continue the work without the Germans ever suspecting that their most secure communications had been compromised for years. Poland's final gift to the Allied cause was silence, but that same silence is the source of a profound and enduring historical mystery. By burning nearly everything, the Poles didn't just hide their secrets from the enemy, they hid them from us, from history itself. We know the broad outline of their success because a few key figures, like Marian Rejewski, survived the war and were able to recount their story. But the devil, as always, is in the details, and those details went up in smoke. The central, haunting question is a simple one. What else did they know? The surviving accounts and the limited documents that were shared with the British before the invasion provide a skeleton of their achievement, but the full body of their knowledge is gone. Historians and cryptologists have been piecing it together for decades, but they are working with fragments. For instance, we know the Poles were reading Enigma traffic for years before the war. What strategic insights did they gain? Their decrypted messages would have provided an incredibly detailed picture of German military readiness, command structure, and even early war plans. Did they, for example, decipher messages hinting at the eventual invasion of Poland itself? Or perhaps even earlier, more tentative plans for what would become the Blitzkrieg. This lost intelligence could have rewritten our understanding of the pre-war period. Furthermore, the full technical scope of their work remains unclear. Rejewski's breakthroughs were mathematical marvels, but how far had his team advanced beyond the initial break? Had they developed more sophisticated techniques for dealing with the increasingly complex Enigma variations the Germans introduced? The British bomb machine, famously engineered by Alan Turing, was a direct descendant of the Polish bomba, but it was also a significant evolution. How many of those evolutionary steps had the Polish engineers already conceived of, or even begun to prototype? By destroying their plans, they left us to wonder how much further ahead they were than anyone has ever given them credit for. The greatest loss, however, may be the human one. The Cipher Bureau was a team of brilliant individuals, yet the burned files likely contain the full roster of contributors, the personal stories of their breakthroughs, the failed attempts, and the moments of inspiration. We know the names of the stars like Rajewski, Zygalski, and Rozicki, but what of the other mathematicians, the engineers who machined the rotors, the clerks who sorted the intercepts, the radio operators who copied the coded messages from the airwaves? Their contributions, their small parts in this grand narrative, are almost certainly lost forever, anonymized by the very fire that protected their secret. The burned files of the Cipher Bureau represent more than just missing data. They represent a severed connection to the complete truth of one of history's greatest intellectual victories, a permanent reminder that sometimes the most successful acts of espionage are the ones that leave no trace at all. But just as the ghost of a second man haunts the upper echelons of MI6, a different and even more unsettling specter was suspected to be lurking within its sister service, the very agency tasked with rooting out such traitors. This is the story of the alleged mole in MI5, a case that is less about a specific person and more about a pervasive, terrifying atmosphere of suspicion that crippled British counterintelligence from within for decades. The question wasn't just about who had betrayed their country, but whether the very guardians of the nation's secrets had been compromised at the highest possible level, turning the hunters into the hunted and making every success a potential setup and every failure a possible act of sabotage. The origins of this paranoia can be traced to a series of devastating and inexplicable intelligence disasters throughout the 1950s and 60s. It began with the exposure of the Cambridge Five, which was itself a catastrophic failure for MI5, but the problems ran much deeper. Time and again, high-profile operations aimed at exposing Soviet networks would inexplicably collapse. Promising defectors from the Eastern Bloc would often be neutralized by the KGB before they could fully share their intelligence, suggesting a tip-off from someone with foreknowledge of their arrival. Clandestine efforts to run double agents would falter, with the agents themselves being quietly eliminated or turned back against the British. Most frustratingly, whenever MI5 seemed to be getting close to uncovering a new Soviet penetration, the trail would suddenly go cold, as if the opposition had been given a quiet warning to cease activity and cover their tracks. This pattern was so consistent that it pointed to a terrifying possibility: a high-level source, or sources, within MI5 itself, a mole who was not just leaking information, but actively steering investigations away from the truth. The investigation into this potential cancer eventually acquired a name: Operation Fluency. This was not a single case, but a long-running, internal, and deeply secretive mole hunt that consumed the attention of a small, trusted cell within the security service for years. Their task was as grim as it was necessary: to re-examine every major counterintelligence failure and see if the fingerprints of a deliberate leak could be found. The atmosphere inside MI5 became poisonous, with colleagues eyeing each other with distrust, afraid to share sensitive information for fear it would reach the enemy. The investigation inevitably began to focus on the men at the very top, those with the broadest access and the authority to divert suspicion. And one name, more than any other, came to symbolize this lingering doubt: that of Sir Roger Hollies, the Director General of MI5 from 1956 to 1965. Hollies was, on paper, an unlikely suspect. A former businessman who had served in the Far East before joining the service, he was a classic establishment bureaucrat, known more for his administrative competence than for any dazzling intellectual brilliance. But it was precisely his tenure at the top that coincided with some of MI5's most glaring failures. Under his leadership, the hunt for the Cambridge Five stalled repeatedly. He was often curiously dismissive of evidence pointing to further high-level penetration, reportedly shutting down promising lines of inquiry. To the officers working on Fluency, his behavior seemed less like the caution of a prudent manager and more like the actions of a man who had something to hide. The suspicions grew so loud that after his retirement, Hollies was summoned back and subjected to a series of intense, humiliating interrogations by his former subordinates, a virtually unprecedented act within the service. Yet, despite the circumstantial case and the palpable suspicion, no concrete evidence ever emerged to prove Hollies was a Soviet agent. He defended himself with exasperated denials, and his supporters argued that he was simply a pragmatic leader dealing with an almost impossible situation, hampered by the brilliant deception of the known traitors and the institutional arrogance of a service that refused to believe it could be so thoroughly penetrated. In the end, two official inquiries, most notably one led by the formidable cabinet secretary Lord Trend, concluded that there was no case against him. The official verdict was that he was not a spy, but the mystery did not end with that verdict. It simply transformed. If Hollies was innocent, then how does one explain the persistent pattern of failure? The alternative theory is perhaps even more disturbing. It suggests that the real mole was not Hollies, but someone else who was never identified, someone who was clever enough to let the suspicion fall on the Director General, using him as a perfect shield. This unknown individual could have skillfully manipulated events from a slightly lower level, feeding just enough information to create a pattern of compromise while ensuring Hollies took the blame for the resulting operational disasters. This theory paints a picture of a KGB so brilliantly manipulative that it could turn the British Security Service against its own leader, paralyzing it with internal distrust for a generation. The file on the mole in MI5 remains officially closed but spiritually open, a permanent wound on the service's history. It stands as the ultimate espionage riddle, a mystery where the lack of proof is not evidence of innocence, but the hallmark of a perfectly executed deception, leaving us to wonder if the greatest victory of Soviet intelligence was making the British believe they had found a traitor, when in truth, the real one might still be hiding in the unanswered questions. Long before the sleek gadgets and global spy agencies of the modern era, the art of secret communication was being perfected in the dusty halls of ancient empires, using methods so clever that some of their messages remain locked away even now, utterly impervious to the most advanced code-breaking techniques of our time. This takes us back to a world of papyrus scrolls and wax tablets, where the fate of empires could hinge on a single, concealed message, and where spies relied on codes that were, for their time, absolutely unbreakable. The truly fascinating part is that several of these ancient ciphers have, in fact, never been cracked, meaning there are likely spy reports, military orders, and political intrigues from thousands of years ago that are sitting in museums right now, their secrets forever silent, waiting for a key that may never be found. One of the most famous and enduring of these mysteries comes from the heart of the Roman Empire. Julius Caesar, a master of military strategy and political cunning, famously used a simple substitution cipher to protect his communications, a method so associated with him that we still call it the Caesar cipher today. It worked by shifting each letter in the alphabet by a fixed number of places, but the Romans had far more sophisticated methods than this. There are references in historical texts to complex cipher systems used for the most sensitive messages, systems that have been lost to time. The real mystery, however, lies with a different kind of code altogether. The Romans were also known to use steganography, the art of hiding a message's very existence. A letter from a Roman spy might appear to be an innocent merchant's invoice or a bland personal note, but written in invisible ink between the lines was the real intelligence, crafted from substances like milk or fruit juice that would darken when heated. How many of these seemingly mundane documents survive today? They're true, secret messages completely overlooked because we never thought to hold them over a candle. The possibility is thrilling, suggesting that a crucial piece of Roman history might be hiding in plain sight, waiting for a curious historian to apply the right kind of heat. Yet, for all of Rome's ingenuity, it is in ancient China that we find one of the most physically fascinating and totally unsolved coding systems. During the tumultuous Warring States period, a time of constant intrigue and shifting alliances, a ruler needed a secure way to authorize military movements and confirm the identity of his messengers. The solution was a tiger-shaped tally. This was an object, often made of bronze, that was broken into two pieces. The ruler kept one half, and his trusted general in the field held the other. When an order was sent, the messenger would carry the ruler's half. Only if it fit perfectly with the general's half was the order considered authentic and could be acted upon. This was a brilliant physical cipher, a three-dimensional key that could not be forged. But here's the tantalizing mystery. We have found many of these tallies in archaeological digs. We understand their mechanical purpose, but we have no way of knowing what specific, world-altering orders they authorized. Each tally represents a moment of critical decision, a command that might have sent thousands of soldiers into battle, or sealed a secret pact with a rival state. The message itself is gone, lost to time, but the key to understanding it is right there in our hands, a silent metallic guardian of a secret we can never learn. Perhaps the single greatest challenge to modern cryptanalysts, however, comes from a script that isn't a cipher at all, but an entire written language that remains completely undeciphered, a locked door to a lost world of secrets. Linear A, used by the Minoan civilization on Crete around 1800 BCE, is the perfect example. Archaeologists have found numerous clay tablets inscribed with this elegant, hieroglyphic script, often in contexts that suggest administrative record-keeping. But for over a century, despite the best efforts of brilliant linguists and codebreakers, including those who famously cracked Linear B, its successor, Linear A, has resisted all attempts at translation. We don't even know what language family it belongs to. This means that every one of those tablets is a secret message. Were they tax records, inventories of supplies, or were some of them something far more intriguing, reports from Minoan agents monitoring the restive populations on their islands, or intelligence on the growing power of the Mycenaeans on the mainland? The Minoans were a great maritime power, a civilization of traders and explorers. It is almost unthinkable that they did not have a robust intelligence apparatus to protect their interests. The secrets of how they managed their empire, who they saw as friends and foes, and how they maintained their power for centuries are almost certainly recorded in Linear A. The tablets are there. We can see the words, but the meaning is a void, a constant reminder that some of history's most fascinating spy stories are written in a language we may never understand, their ancient truths forever encrypted by the passage of millennia. And so our journey through these 25 unsolved cases draws to a close, a winding path through a world of shadows where certainty is a luxury and truth is often the most carefully guarded secret of all. From the geopolitical earthquake of the Zimmerman telegram to the silent, patient work of the Alleggers program, from the heartbreaking tragedy of Noor Inai at Khan to the macabre genius of the Bulgarian umbrella, each story is a powerful reminder that history is not a neat set of solved puzzles on a shelf. It is a living, breathing thing, filled with gaps and whispers, where the most important chapters are sometimes the ones that were never written down, or were deliberately burned to protect a nation, an ideology, or a single, devastating truth. What ties these 25 mysteries together is more than just their unresolved nature. It is the profound way they illustrate the very essence of espionage itself, a world built on deception, where nothing is ever quite as it seems. These cases show us that the most successful operations are often the ones we never hear about, and that the most damaging betrayals can come from the last person anyone would ever suspect. They force us to confront an uncomfortable reality, that for every spy we catch, there might be another who lived and died in plain sight, their secrets intact. For every code we break, there might be another, like Linear A, that forever guards the messages of a lost civilization. These aren't just historical footnotes. They are permanent question marks that challenge our understanding of the past and keep us questioning the narratives we think we know. This shadowy nature of intelligence work means that some secrets are destined to remain forever locked away. Files disintegrate, memories fade, and the individuals who held the answers take their knowledge to the grave. The complete story of the Cambridge Five, the final fate of the Amnesia Man of Prague, the ultimate truth about Oswald Lewinter, these may be truths we simply never learn. And perhaps that is the most fitting legacy for the world of spies, a permanent shroud of mystery, a testament to the fact that in the clandestine struggle between nations, the greatest victory is sometimes not in winning the game, but in ensuring that the other side never even learns the final score. But the conversation doesn't have to end here. History is a dialogue, and these mysteries thrive on the curiosity and speculation of everyone who encounters them. Which of these 25 cases captivated you the most? Do you have a theory on the identity of the second man in MI6, or a different take on what really happened to William Morgan in Cuba? The comments are the perfect place to share your own ideas and dive deeper with other history enthusiasts. This is how we keep these stories alive, by adding our voices to the ongoing investigation. If you found this exploration into the world's greatest unsolved espionage mysteries as fascinating as I did, then you definitely won't want to miss what's coming next. We're just getting started with our historical deep dives into the events that shaped our world from behind the scenes. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you're the first to know when we uncover our next batch of hidden histories and enduring enigmas. Until then, keep looking closer and question everything, because the most incredible story might be the one that's still waiting.